pediatrician and a pediatric intensivist from Noble Medical College, Biratnagar, Nepal. I'm working as an assistant professor here. So we'll be talking about cystic fibrosis. So we'll start with a case scenario. So 8-year-old male was born to second-degree consanguineous parents, was referred to a respiratory clinic for poorly controlled asthma, and child has associated lethargy, night sweats, and weight loss. TB screening was done 2 years back, which was normal. And in view of asthma, child was started on budesonide and formoterol at referral hospital, but symptoms were poorly controlled. So based on this clinical history, further evaluation was done. Height and weight were on 10 centile for his age. Chest X-ray showed bilateral hilar lymphadenopathy. Montauk's TB spot test and sputum AFB was done, which were negative. Sputum culture was sent, which showed growth of Staph aureus. And on further evaluation, child was completely immunized. Family history of autopsy was present, and the history of recurrent pneumonia were there. The child required PSU admission at 3 and 5 years of age twice. And there was also history of recurrent pain abdomen and steatorrhea was there. So child has recurrent respiratory tract infection along with GI infection. Steatorrhea was there. Features of malabsorption were also there. And then the child has failure to thrive as well. So based on this history and physical examination, provisional diagnosis was cystic fibrosis, and the other differentials were like bronchial asthma, tuberculosis, ciliary dyskinesia, and immunodeficiency or recurrent aspiration. So talking about cystic fibrosis, basically cystic fibrosis is an inherited multi-system disorder of children and adults, and it's a common life-limiting recessive genetic trait among the whites. And the primary defect in cystic fibrosis is dysfunction of cystic fibrosis transmembrane conductance regulator protein, that is also known as CFTR protein. Incidence, so basically it's common in wide population of North Europe and North America. Incidence, there is a 1 in 3,500 live birth, but the estimated prevalence in Indians is around 1 in 43,321 to 1 in 1 lakh population. And the carrier frequency of delta 508 deletion mutation in North Indian population is about 0.42%. So discussing about pathophysiology. So basically, the cystic fibrosis is autosomal recessive disease. So if both the parents are carrier, so in that case, 25% of children will have cystic fibrosis phenotype also, and they will be homozygous for cystic fibrosis as well. Whereas 50% of children will be heterozygous for cystic fibrosis, but will have normal phenotype, and rest 25% will have normal phenotype, and they will be homozygously normal as well. So discussing further, CFTR protein basically helps to control bulk of water flow across the epithelium. So there will be activation of adenyl cyclase. So it will result in generation of cyclic AMP, which activates a CFTR protein, and there will be secretion of chloride ion in the lumen. So normally these sodium channels are usually open, but extensive sodium flux requires a counter. And if CFTR channel is open, this chloride ion acts as a counter, and therefore sodium chloride flows across the membrane. And water then flows across the cell to maintain the osmotic pressure. And the end result is isotonic sodium chloride solution that flows from the blood to the lumen or the vice versa. So this CFTR protein mutation, there are more than 1,500 mutation is there. Most common one is deletion of 508, and the frequency of this delta 508 mutation in Indian children is about 19 to 34%. So there is loss of function of CFTR protein, and as it acts as a chloride ion transporter, and basically it's caused by misfolding of the protein. So there will be abnormal sodium and chloride transport across the cell membrane, and which causes all the secretions to be thick and tenacious, And this secretion will be thick and tenacious in lung and pancreas and hepatobiliary tract as well. And these thick and sticky secretions, they are difficult to move. And this causes airway obstruction, result in air traffic and frequent respiratory infection as well, and also pancreatic insufficiency. Clinical features, so mainly lung is involved, and the most fatalities result from the progressive lung disease. So earliest pathological lesion is bronchiolitis, which progresses to bronchitis, bronchiolitis obliterans, or bronchiectasis. Sometimes bronchiectatic cyst or empyesematous bulla subpleural blephs are also seen, and they are usually seen in upper lobes. Paranasal sinuses are also involved, and they are filled with secretions, and there might be formation of multiple polyp as well. So we'll continue with our case. So in our case, HRCT was done, which showed bronchiectasis with mucus plugging. A sweat chloride test was shown, which was high. So it was 80 millimole per liter. So likely diagnosis was cystic fibrosis. So then the serial X-ray of the child was reviewed over the past 6 years duration. So initial X-ray showed features of hyperinflation with streaky densities. And later X-ray shows there was areas of bronchial thickening and plugging and patchy atelectasis as well, and which were more seen over upper lobes. CT scan showed presence of bronchiectasis and mucus plugging, and there was presence of saccular bronchiectasis as well. Then a lung function test was done, which showed features of obstructive pathology. And similarly, fetal elastase level was low, which is suggestive of pancreatic insufficiency. And then genetic testing was done to confirm the diagnosis of cystic fibrosis. And it showed a single codon deletion at position delta 508. So other clinical features commonly involved in intestine. So usually the child with cystic fibrosis will have meconium ileus at birth. And at later childhood, child will have distal intestinal obstruction syndrome, which is known as DIOS. They will have features of pancreatic insufficiency. They might have features of mechanical problem like inflammation, scarring, stricture, and obstruction by fetal impaction and intussusception. Adhesion may form, and it can lead to complete obstruction. So we'll briefly discuss about the second case. So 48 hours female child was admitted to NICU for abdominal distension. Child developed vomiting and abdominal distension after feed, which X-ray abdomen was showed, which showed grossly dilated bowel loops, mainly large bowel was grossly dilated. And then barium enema was done, which showed features of large meconium in the cecum, and there was functional microcolon, and rectum was normal, which are suggestive of meconium ileus. So meconium ileus is the earliest clinical manifestation of cystic fibrosis, occur in about 10 to 20% of child with cystic fibrosis. It presents with abdominal distension, bilious vomiting, and delayed passage of meconium, and it frequently results in neonatal intestinal obstruction. For liver involvement, a child can have features of obstructive cirrhosis, can present with esophageal varices, splenomegaly, and features of hypersplenism. Secondary involvement of liver can also occur due to malnutrition or due to right-sided heart failure. They frequently have gallstone, and this gallstone formation is due to abnormal mucin in the gallbladder and malabsorption of bile acids. So here we'll see different system involvement according to age group of the child. So usually in infancy, sinopulmonary involvement is more of sinopulmonary infection, whereas GI involvement is more of meconium ileus or pancreatic insufficiency, whereas renal endocrine involvement is more of dehydration and hyponatremic metabolic alkalosis. Whereas once the child gets older, they are more prone to have nasal polyps or frequent sinusitis. They are more prone
Let's go to the previous slide where we have left.
I think it was from here, sir, no?
Yeah, from here.
Yeah. So sorry for interruption. So we'll be continuing our presentation. So the involvement of different organ system depends upon the age group, and similarly, when in infancy, the children have more of sinopulmonary infection, and they are more prone to have meconium ileus and pancreatic insufficiency, and they are more prone to have dehydration and hyponatremic metabolic alkalosis. Whereas once the child gets older in childhood, they are more prone to have polyposis and sinusitis. Similarly, in GI involvement, they are more prone to have intussusception and hepatic steatosis. Whereas in case of adulthood, they are more prone to have recurrent hemoptysis, allergic bronchopulmonary aspergillosis, and nasal polyposis. And in GI involvement, they are more prone to have distal intestinal obstruction, and biliary cirrhosis and fibrosis. In endocrine involvement, they are more prone to have delayed puberty, osteoporosis, recurrent renal calculi, and renal failure. So talking about diagnostic criteria of cystic fibrosis, so there should be presence of typical clinical feature, either respiratory, gastrointestinal, or genitourinary, or a history of cystic fibrosis in a sibling, or a positive newborn screening test. Plus, there should be evidence of CFTR dysfunction, which is evidenced by 2 elevated sodium chloride concentration obtained on separate days, or identification of 2 cystic fibrosis mutation, or an abnormal nasal potential difference measurement. So if this criteria is present, child will be diagnosed as a child with cystic fibrosis. So for sweat chloride test, we do pilocarpine iontophoresis test. So for this, we collect about 50 mg or preferably 100 mg of sweat for reliable result. And the normal value is less than 40. So if it is more than 60, it is consistent with diagnosis of cystic fibrosis. Whereas values between 40 to 60 are borderline, and in that scenario, the test should be repeated. And if the initial test is positive, it should again be repeated several weeks apart, at least after 2 to 4 weeks. So there are different conditions where the sweat chloride test can have false positive and false negative result. So false positive test can be seen when the child has eczema or ectodermal dysplasia, if the child has malnutrition, failure to thrive, G6PD deficiency, or hypothyroidism. Whereas false negative results are seen when the child has malnutrition, generalized anasarca, or the child has hyponatremia. So these are the conditions where this test can have false positive and false negative result. Similarly, there is another method to detect it. So it's done by NanoDoc. So it's a new analyzing system which requires around only 3 microliter of sweat, and the result is available within 30 minutes, and induces collect and analyze sweat in a single step while electrode and sensor are applied to the site. And this test has also similar sensitivity to pilocarpine iontophoresis test. And then for confirmation of diagnosis, DNA testing should be done. So it tests about 30 to 96 of the most common CFTR mutation, and usually identifies more than 90% of individuals who carry 2 or more cystic fibrosis mutation. Other diagnostic tests are increased nasal potential differences, which is usually done in cases of when the child has equivocal result with sweat chloride test. And for pancreatic function, elastase 1 activity is checked in fresh stool, or 72 hours total fat estimation is done. For pulmonary function assessment, usually if the child is examined earlier for pulmonary function assessment, they will have features of obstructive finding with a modest response to bronchodilator, whereas in later phases, usually they will have restrictive changes in pulmonary function test. And usually microbiological studies showed growth of Staph aureus or mucoid colony of Pseudomonas aeruginosa or Burkholderia capacia. And other organism which is usually associated with cystic fibrosis is Stenotrophomonas, Achromobacter, fungi, and non-tubercular Mycobacterium species. So here we can see the prevalence of organism causing recurrent infection differs between different age groups. So earlier in the age group, the most common organism resulting in recurrent respiratory infection is usually Staph aureus. And then once the child reaches 5 to 8 years of age, the prevalent organism is usually Pseudomonas aeruginosa, and it's followed by Staph aureus. So for heterozygote detection and prenatal diagnosis, so it should be done in all couple with planning for children, and if they have family history of cystic fibrosis, or if the partner, one of the partner has cystic fibrosis, and it should be tested. Testing should be done in a spouse of a carrier with a standard probe, and usually sensitivity is around 90%. Similarly, for newborn screening, combination of immunoreactive trypsinogen and DNA testing can be done on the blood spot, and the screening test is about 95% sensitive. Regarding management of cystic fibrosis, so management depend upon the pathophysiology of the process. So the management for the defect, so if there is abnormal CFTR protein is there, so usually it can be managed with gene therapy or protein replacement. So if there is abnormal sodium chloride or water movement through the cell, it should be managed by correction of electrolytes. So if there is features of thick and dry mucus, usually it is managed by mucolytics and physical therapy, so mucus clearing techniques. So if there is presence of inflammation, infection, or tissue damage, usually it is managed with anti-inflammatory agent and antimicrobials. And for respiratory failure, if it is acute, usually managed by oxygen, non-invasive ventilatory support, or invasive ventilatory support. And if it is chronic, lung transplant should be considered. So basically, general approach to management. So usually, child with cystic fibrosis should receive a multidisciplinary approach to management. So usually, the person who are involved in management should include a nurse, a physical therapist, respiratory therapist, social worker, and a dietitian. And baseline assessment should be done, clearing up pulmonary involvement, and education of both a patient and the parents should be done. Adequate hydration should be maintained, either oral or IV route, depending on the condition of the patient. And our goal should be maintain a stable condition for prolonged period, and then monitoring of growth and complication. For pulmonary therapy is done to clear the secretions from airway and to control infection. So there are different inhalation therapy that is available, and it is used to deliver medication and hydrate the respiratory tract. And different options are either human recombinant DNA is used, improves the pulmonary function, decreases pulmonary exacerbation, and promotes the sense of well-being. N-acetylcysteine, it's nebulized as a 5 to 10% of solution. It improves the airway clearance, and it also augments the airway glutathione. Similarly, nebulized hypertonic saline can be used. It rehydrates the mucus, and it also improves the mucociliary clearance. Different aerosolized antibiotics are used when the airway is colonized with Pseudomonas or as a part of daily therapy. So the options are aerosolized tobramycin or aerosolized aztreonam. So usually it's used as suppressive therapy. It's given for 1 month, and then it's stopped for next 1 month. It usually reduces the symptoms, improves the pulmonary function, and alleviate the need of hospitalization. Then for airway clearance therapy, usually chest percussion combined with postural drainage is done, and it helps to drain the smaller airways. It's usually recommended 1 to 4 times a day, depending on the severity of the lung. Usually it starts with the percussion. So percussion should be done for 3 to 5 minutes, and then it's followed by a chest vibration, which is done for around 15 to 20 seconds. And then it is followed by coughing or forced expiration or huffing. And patients are encouraged to do forced expiration, and then each segment of the lung is drained. So we can see here, there are different maneuvers which help us to drain different affected part of the lung. So usually for upper lobes and for front of the upper lobes from the upper front chest, so these maneuvers are used, and for the lower chest or lower lobes, these maneuvers are used. So basically, the aim is to keep whichever part of the lung or lobe of the lung we want to drain. So usually it is kept at a dependent position. So, and after that, it is usually chest percussion is done, followed by chest vibration, and the forced expiration is encouraged, or coughing or hopping is encouraged to drain the particular affected lobe. Regarding antibiotic therapy, so goal is to reduce the endobronchial infection and delay the progression of lung damage. So usually oral antibiotics are used if there is respiratory symptoms and if organism is identified on the lower respiratory tract. And usually course of therapy is around 2 weeks, and usually maximum dose of antibiotics are used to get the adequate concentration of drug in the respiratory epithelium. And the common organism that should be covered is Staph aureus, H. influenzae, Pseudomonas, Burkholderia, or other gram-negative rods. They also have usually prone to have atypical infection. So usually the study has shown that microlides reduces the treats the atypical infection and also reduces the virulence of Pseudomonas infection, and it reduces the formation of biofilm production, and it itself has anti-inflammatory effect as well. So the long-term therapy azithromycin 3 times a week improves the lung function in a child with chronic Pseudomonas infection. Other aerosolized antibiotics which can be used is tobramycin, colistin, or gentamicin. And usually this tobramycin is given as a dose of 300 mg BID on alternate month for 6 months, and it decreases the Pseudomonas density in the respiratory tract, reduces hospitalization, and improves pulmonary function. Similarly, nebulized aztreonam is also used, and it's given as 3 times a daily therapy on alternate month for a child with chronic Pseudomonas aeruginosa infection. Usually, IV antibiotics is usually reserved for progressive or autolytic symptoms despite intensive therapy measures. And if Pseudomonas organism is cultured, it requires true dog therapy. And even after the child is non-responder to IV antibiotics, other organisms should be considered like Aspergillus, non-tubercular mycobacteria, or Burkholderia. And Burkholderia is usually responsive to either carbapenems or chloramphenicol. Bronchodilator therapy is usually given when the child has features of frank asthma or allergic bronchopulmonary aspergillosis, and usually beta-adrenergic agonist cromolyn sodium ipratropium bromide is used. Anti-inflammatory agents are used. So usually long-term ibuprofen is used to usually slow the disease progression. Similarly, steroids is also used for either severe reactive airway disease or if there is presence of allergic bronchopulmonary aspergillosis, in which case steroid is used along with antifungal. Sometimes endoscopy and bronchial lavage may be required if there is a presence of atelectasis or mucoid impaction, and usually it's done through a fiber optic bronchoscope. Other emerging therapies which are available now are CFTR mutation potentiators. So these are ivacaftor, which improves FEV1, it decreases the pulmonary exaggeration and results in weight gain. Similarly, other CFTR potentiators are lumacaftor or tezacaftor. So it also stabilizes the misfolded delta 5-notate deletion, and it usually the effect of lumacaftor is potentiated by ivacaftor. And the combination of tezacaftor and ivacaftor is usually indicated in children more than 12 years of age. And all these drugs improves FEV1 and overall well-being. Triple combination is also used with tezacaftor and ivacaftor. It is used as a CFTR mutation correction agent. It improves FEV1. It also reduces the sweat chloride level. So these are the options. So either ivacaftor, lumacaftor, or ivacaftor, or tezacaftor, ivacaftor can be used. So there are different age group where it is indicated. And usually ivacaftor is used in children more than 12 years of age, whereas lumacaftor and ivacaftor is used in the children more than 2 years of age with delta 5-notate homozygous deletion. And tezacaftor and ivacaftor is used when in children more than 12 years of age with delta 5-notate deletion if it is homozygous or heterozygous with another mutation, that is responsive mutation. So studies has shown that the use of this elexacaftor, tezacaftor, and ivacaftor, so if it is used, so it causes marked improvement in FEV1 after use for 4 weeks, and the This study shows that the effect was statistically significant. Sometimes gene therapy can also be used it replaces the defective cystic fibrosis gene in the lung, and it helps to either slow the progression of the disease. So we'll continue with our case. Our case, which was a 8-year-old child. So after 4 months of initial treatment, child presented to ER again, and child on arrival, child was intubated and ventilated, and the child was intubated at outside hospital for impending respiratory failure. So usually indication of intubation in this case, we'll try to avoid intubation as much as possible in this case, because they usually have severe bronchospasm, and they're the risks of mechanical ventilation, like the child are more prone to have air trapping, and they are more prone to have pneumothorax or pneumomediastin. So usually intubation and mechanical ventilation is indicated when there is a failed maximum medical management and NIV support, then the child is intubated. So these are the few indications where the child should be intubated, like following cardiorespiratory arrest, or if there is a refractory hypoxemia, or if there is severe respiratory acidosis, which is unresponsive to pharmacotherapy. So our goal during ventilation is to maintain the adequate oxygenation and permissive hypercarbia, and we try to adjust the minute ventilation in order to maintain the arterial pH of more than 7.2. So major issues with mechanical ventilation in this case is basically the child has issues of both poor compliance and high resistance. They are at risk of air trapping due to dynamic hyperinflation and pneumothorax. And sometimes this child have chronic CO2 retention, and they are dependent on that CO2 for the respiratory drive. So suddenly, if you try to intubate the child, child can go in cardiac arrest as well. And usually this child will have compensated metabolic alkalosis as well due to chronic hyponatremia and metabolic alkalosis due to increased sodium loss in the sweat. So usually they might have features of hypovolemia during intubation. So all these things should be kept in mind. And usually this child has dynamic hyperinflation, so they can have various cardiopulmonary interaction during sedation and mechanical intubation, intubation and mechanical ventilation. So while choosing the modes of ventilation, so we can choose any modes of ventilation, whichever mode we are familiar with. But usually volume control modes are usually preferred because they will have a constant flow. So they will have a stable tidal volume, and so there will be less risk of barotrauma. Or nowadays we can also use PRVC modes of ventilation. So it has the advantage of both volume control and pressure control ventilation. So they will have a constant tidal volume, and they will have also a decelerating flow pattern. So that will result in a low peak pressure at the same tidal volume also. So we can choose either PRVC mode of ventilation or volume control ventilation. So while setting the various ventilatory setting in this child, so whenever we PEEP, we can what you can do is we can monitor the auto PEEP. So for auto PEEP, we can measure the auto PEEP once the child is sedated and paralyzed by expiratory hold maneuver. So after measuring the auto PEEP, if the child is still paralyzed, so we try to keep extrinsic PEEP less than the auto PEEP. But once the child have started spontaneous breathing effort, so in that case, we try to measure the auto PEEP, and usually we keep extrinsic PEEP about 75 to 80% of that of auto PEEP, so that the child will have to overcome only a smaller delta PEEP gradient, and the child can trigger the ventilator. Regarding respiratory rate, we usually reduce the respiratory rate so that child can have maximum exhalation type, and there will be better CO2 clearance in the child. So normally, wherever there is a hypercarbia, so in a response to hypercarbia, there will be increased respiratory rate, and increased respiratory rate results in increased minute ventilation, and there will be increased CO2 clearance. But what happens, this child usually have severe bronchospasm, so there will be air trapping, and instead of in that increase in respiratory rate will result in a smaller expiratory time, and that will result in air trapping. And that air trapping secondary result again exaggerate the hypercarbia. So what we do is, wherever the CO2 is raised, so we decrease the respiratory rate, and once we decrease the respiratory rate, there will be adequate expiratory time, and adequate expiratory time will lead to better CO2 clearance, and that will result in improved CO2 clearance. And while setting the inspiratory and expiratory time, we should keep an eye over either flow time scaler or flow volume loop. So you can see here in this flow time scaler, in this first one, you can see that the expression is being completed and then only inspiration is being started. Whereas in children, if the child has features, child has severe bronchospasm, so we can see here the expression is getting started. Inspiration is getting started before the completion of expiration. So gradually it will lead to dynamic hyperinflation and formation of autopy. So we'll try to fix the inspiratory time and expiratory time, and we'll try to see whether the this flow time scalar is being completed or not. Similarly, we can assess by flow volume loop also. So usually we can see if there is a dynamic hyperinflation or there is auto peep, we can see that expiration is prolonged and it's not getting completed. So we can keep on watch over this flow time scalar, and then we can adjust our expiratory time. So usually tidal volume, a higher tidal volume is kept because to maintain the minute ventilation, because rates are kept low. And usually this child, if they have features of higher resistance, so usually they will have high peak pressure. So in that case, what we will do is we'll measure the plateau pressure. So for that, we'll adequately sedate and paralyze the child. And then with inspiratory hold technique, we measure the plateau pressure. So we'll target the plateau pressure less than 28 to 30 centimeter of water. And even with this, we should accept permissive hypoxemia and permissive hypercarbia. So even if the child is maintaining saturation more than 88% and PaCO2 is, we can accept up to 50 to 60 if RTL pH is more than 7.2. So nebulization during ventilation, so it can be given either in line with ventilator, and we should try to minimize disconnect or time of the ventilator. So usually that nebulizer chamber, it should be kept about 10 to 15 centimeter away from the endotracheal tube or Y-piece connector. We should not keep it between the endotracheal tube and Y-piece connector, because it will act as a dead space and it can be detrimental in smaller infants and children. And usually it should be kept in inspiratory limb, and ideally a volume control ventilation is used with a constant flow, and oxygen flow rate should be kept more than 6 liters per minute for optimal nebulization in mechanical ventilator. So we'll briefly discuss about other complication, that is management of ARDS in these children. So they don't have only features of increased resistance. If the child develop sepsis, pneumonia, and child develop ARDS, so in that case the child will have features of low compliance as well. So usually in that condition, we'll briefly discuss about management of ARDS in children. So usually NIV should be considered only in the earlier course of the disease. So if it is considered also, it should be considered only in the earlier course of the disease. And for ventilatory support, so there is no specific recommendation on the mode of ventilation. But if you are ventilating a child with lung has low compliance, so we should usually keep a tidal volume about 3 to 6 ml per kg if the compliance is poor, or if compliance is slightly better, we can keep up to 5 to 8 ml per kg also, and try to limit the inspiratory plateau pressure less than 28 centimeter of water. So for PEEP, so we can keep moderately elevated level of PEEP about 10 to 15. Titrated, it should be titrated to obtain better oxygenation and hemodynamic response. Sometime in case of severe ARDS, PEEP more than 15 can also be used, but usually plateau pressure should be limited. Careful recruitment maneuver can also be assessed. So if while doing, we can even try, if the child has severe hypoxemia, we can even try PEEP titration. And for PEEP titration, we can use either slow incremental or decremental steps. And usually sustained inflation maneuvers are not recommended in children. And we'll try to keep driving pressure, which is plateau pressure minus PEEP. So usually we try to keep driving pressure less than 15 to 16. And the study has shown that if the driving pressure is decreased, it is associated with increased survival. Other option in case of refractory hypoxemia is high frequency oxidative ventilation. So it can be an alternative mode of ventilator in a patient who has plateau pressure, which is exceeding more than 28 centimeter of water in conventional ventilation. And we should also assess permissive hypercapnia in moderate to severe ARDS to minimize the ventilator-induced lung injury. So even if the child has PaCO2 of about 50 to 60, and if arterial pH is maintained more than 7.2, and there is no worsening of lactic acidosis, we can accept the PaCO2 up to 50 to 60. In case of moderate to severe ARDS, if the child has refractory hypoxemia, prone positioning can also be used. And if it is used, it should be used for more than 12 to 18 hours in a day. And the study has shown that early application of prolonged prone positioning significantly reduces the mortality. The child should be adequately sedated in early course of the disease, and neuromuscular blockade agent is only required if sedation alone is inadequate. And there is no specific recommendation regarding use of inhaled nitric oxide in case of ARDS. So we'll continue with the case. Once the child was stabilized and the child was weaned from the ventilator and extubated, as the ET tube itself act as a risk factor for severe bronchospasm in this child. So once the child gets stabilized, we should try to extubate earlier. And the sputum culture of this child showed a presence of pseudomonas. So anti-pseudomonal antibiotics were completed for 2 weeks, and the child was discharged and then asked to, and the child was followed up, and the child was monitored for growth and complications, further complications. The height and the weight of this child gradually improved, and it increased from 10 centile to about 25 centile, and similarly the lung function also improved. So here, there is an algorithm for the diagnosis of cystic fibrosis in resource limited setting. So we can see if the sweat chloride test is available. So we should send for, whenever we suspect cystic fibrosis, we send for sweat chloride test. If it is more than 60, so again we repeat it after 2 to 4 weeks. If it is again more than 60, it confirms the diagnosis of cystic fibrosis. Whereas if it is borderline between 40 to 60, we repeat it. And again, if it is persistently borderline, usually we send for mutation analysis. If it is less than 40, it rules out cystic fibrosis. But in the region where sweat chloride test is unavailable, we can do is, what we can do is we can send for ABG electrolytes, stool fat, and we can send for respiratory tract secretion for culture. And if this is if 2 or more features are suggestive of cystic fibrosis, we can follow up the child as a suspect cystic fibrosis with empirical enzyme replacement, vitamin supplement, chest physiotherapy, but we should later confirm the cystic fibrosis only after either sending sweat chloride test or mutation analysis. So there are other complications of cystic fibrosis as well. So in brief, we'll be discussing that. The other complication which is commonly associated with cystic fibrosis is atelectasis. So usually these children have mucus plugging and mucosal edema, so they frequently have atelectasis. So for atelectasis, usually we give aggressive IV antibiotics, chest physiotherapy, and chest physiotherapy is usually directed at the affected lobe. And sometimes if there is mucus plug, so bronchoscopy might be required. For hemoptysis, so usually for minor hemoptysis, usually antimicrobial therapy with gentle chest physiotherapy is enough. But for major, we should avoid chest physiotherapy, do bleeding control, and sometimes if bleeding is massive, might require bronchial artery embolization. If the child has recurrent pneumothorax, so usually chest tube placement with or without pleurodesis is required, and for persistent leak, VATS with bleb ligation can be required. And are more prone to have fungal infection also. So for in case of allergic bronchopulmonary aspergillosis, managed with oral steroid and antifungal. For bone and joint, it's managed with NSAIDs, calcium and vitamin D supplementation. For sleep disordered breathing, usually it's managed with nocturnal oxygen supplementation and BiPAP. For acute respiratory failure, usually they are managed with intensive aerosol therapy, postural drainage, IV antibiotics, along with NIV or ventilatory support. For chronic respiratory failure, usually they are managed with home oxygen, NIV support, and sometimes lung transplantation need can also be assessed. If the child has heart failure, usually it's managed with salt restriction, diuretics, and diastasis. Usually these children have failure to thrive. So it's managed usually low fat, high caloric density with pancreatic enzyme replacement, and fat-soluble vitamins. For meconium ileus, child should be adequately hydrated, and child will require gastrography enema and sometimes surgery as well. For hyperglycemia, might require oral hypoglycemic agent or insulin, and for child should be monitored for growth and maturation. And child should be provide adequate nutrition, and if the child has short stature, might require growth hormone therapy as well. So usually these children, they are monitored in cystic fibrosis clinic every 2 to 3 months. And in cystic fibrosis clinic, usually maintenance of growth and development is checked, and lung function is assessed, and the intervention are done if there is any progressive lung disease. They are also monitored for gastrointestinal involvement, and usually enzyme replacement therapy is given along with adequate nutrition, and they are also frequently monitored for complication and then their treatment. The prognosis of these children, so prognosis has markedly improved over the last few decades. So median survival is usually about 36 to 37 years. It's more in male as compared to females. But there exists marked heterogeneity in disease severity and progression. So some children can have a rapid progression and frequent severe infection, whereas other children can have slow progression of the disease and the less severe infection, recurrent infection as well. And usually ultimate outcome depends upon the severity of the pulmonary disease, and it determines the prognosis and the ultimate outcome of the child. Thank you.
Great work, Dr. Sandeep. Very in-depth, and I would like to tell all that this presentation was primarily about cystic fibrosis, but on my request, the aspect of ventilation and associated complication in pediatric ICU and how to manage that, with briefly telling about the settings and how to take care of the problems has been added, because I believe whenever we take a talk on cystic fibrosis, we'll get lost mainly in pathophysiology and CFTR genes and genes and genes and genes and many genes. Ultimately, it is not adding much. As a clinician, we always rely on our genetics counterpart, and we start treating them in our ICUs. There are a few questions which I'm going to take for you, Dr. Sandeep, one by one. So first question is from Dr. Rashna. She
Yes,
is
sir.
asking about, are there any CFTR correction agents available, and what is the cost involved? And in continuation, and do we have a protocol for which drug we have to start first, as first line or as second line?
So depending upon the age group of the child, and there are different CFTR mutation potentiators that are available, like ivacaftor, tezacaftor, elexacaftor. So ivacaftor, they are usually used more than 12 years of age, and if they have homozygous delta 508 mutation. So usually their drugs are available, and depending on the age, they are used. And study has shown that triple therapy along with tezacaftor, elexacaftor, and ivacaftor has shown to slows the progression of disease also and improves the FEV1 as well, and overall well-being of the child. Exact price of this drug, I'm not aware.
Dr. Rashna, actually in India, the FDA approval outside India has also given approval for ivacaftor above 6 years, and it is under research for younger age as well. And the cost is the biggest factor which stops, which is a hindrance for availability as well as for continuation of therapy. So I believe your question will remain unanswered, because definitely availability is a question, and cost is too much at the moment considering the type of drug it is. But this is approved. Ivacaftor specifically is approved. It has a side effect profile of mainly headache, flatulence, and in a very minor population of excessive irritability. These are three complications and adverse effects of this medicine which has been taken. So going to the second question, Dr. Neeraj would like to ask about the pancreatic enzyme therapy in cystic fibrosis.
Yeah. So usually pancreatic enzyme replacement is used, and it is used with each meal, about 25,000 international units, and it's given before the meal. So we should keep a check while giving this pancreatic enzyme replacement, is that if it is given in overdose, so it can result in development of colonic stricture as well. So it's available as Creon. Yeah. It's given as a 20 to 25,000 international unit before each meal.
So PE, pancreatic enzyme replacement therapy, is a very important constituent of treatment, because that is one of the most important aspect which is going to take care of the malabsorption aspect of this problem. And before we start that, is there any relevance of doing fecal elastase or any other test to understand the gravity of how much malabsorption is happening?
Yeah. So yes. Shall I continue, sir?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So before starting pancreatic enzyme replacement therapy, so we should identify the presence of pancreatic insufficiency. For that, we can do either 72 hours total stool fat content, or we can send for fetal elastase level in a fresh stool sample. So usually fetal elastase level less than 15 microgram, it's usually low. So in that case, or if 72 hours total fat content of stool is high, so in that case, we identify as pancreatic insufficiency and we start with pancreatic enzyme replacement therapy.
So in continuation to his question, there are a couple of questions by Dr. Neeraj. He wished to ask if whether we can start Creon, which is the trade name for enzymes, pancreatic enzymes, on basis of suspicion.
So usually we start after confirmation of pancreatic insufficiency. So in the scenario where if we don't have adequate laboratory investigation, like if we are not able to check sodium chloride test or CFTR mutation, in that case, sometime if there is clinical feature suggestive of malabsorption, we can start pancreatic enzyme replacement.
Okay. Before I go to another question by Dr. Anjali, I have one question which is more of a technical question. This is by Dr. Subhranshu. He is asking about, could you please explain why there is an increase in sweat amount with increased chloride concentration in cystic fibrosis, which is in contrast to respiratory tract and GIT, where secretions are thick and chloride cannot exit from the cells. So I believe
Yes,
question is the answer.
Yeah. So basically the CFTR protein mutation is there. So it's basically a chlorides and protein. So if it is mutation is there, so basically chloride are not absorbed. So if chloride is not absorbed, so it along with the chloride, sodium also is more excreted in the sweat. So that is the reason why its content is high in sweat chloride level is high in cystic fibrosis.
Okay. So Dr. Anjali is asking about your 8-year-old child whom you have treated. What was the chronic treatment given to this child after discharge?
Yes, sir. Can you repeat the question, sir, please?
The chronic treatment which was provided to 8-year-old child whom you have discussed here as a case, what was the chronic treatment given to that child?
What was the chronic treatment, sir?
Chronic treatment. What was the treatment provided to this child after diagnosis and after stabilization in PICU? Home treatment. What was given?
Once the child was discharged, so basically the child showed growth of pseudomonas in sputum culture. So the child was given 2 weeks of anti-pseudomonal therapy, and then the child was started on tobramycin nebulization as a suppressive therapy. So for that, for a chronic pseudomonas carrier, the child was started on tobramycin nebulized therapy. So 1 month on and 1 month off was given for 6 month duration. And beside that, the child was started on pancreatic enzyme replacement, and then calcium, vitamin D, and multivitamin therapy as well. Along with that, child was taught about physical therapy as well, and then child was continuously followed up in a cystic fibrosis clinic.
Okay. I think we have taken all the questions, and it was a wonderful presentation, Dr. Sandeep. I hope in case somebody is having some questions, you can post them on the group, and I'll be sharing it with Dr. Sandeep for the answers. Thank you, Dr. Sandeep, for your time and giving us this opportunity. Great. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk here, sir. Thank you.
Great.